Jim Sweeney, would you do the honor? Jim is the chair of the Jesu Sanctuary Committee, the Jesu Circle of Support, and he will introduce our first speaker.
Sure. The evening tonight came as a result of one of our meetings, our last meeting 2 weeks ago. And a number of us had questions because a lot was happening with the Trump administration, with their executive orders, and with the Supreme Court about trying to find out what is this, somebody disseminate the information about all this. So we have, as a member of our Jesu Sanctuary group, Andy Moore, who is also a lawyer, who is also an immigration professor at University Detroit Mercy, who graciously said, I could certainly help to do that. And Bill also invited Yanira Arias from Alianza America to, between the two of them, to be able to kind of disseminate for us exactly what's happening in this country, at least within the last month, with all that flurry of activity. So without further ado, Andy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming to listen to my, I think will be hopefully a brief, maybe 15-minute presentation, although I just got done composing these notes, so we'll see what happens here. I'm switching my screen over to my notes, so I won't be seeing any, if anybody needs to interrupt me or has any questions, I guess I would ask Jim to just orally give me a warning to pause if something is unclear.
Just a quick thing, people can use your chat button at the bottom of your screen. I'll be monitoring the chat button there, so if somebody has a question, just use your chat button. I think we have too many people raising a hand, might not work. Go ahead, Andy.
Okay, so my presentation is going to focus on the actions of the Trump administration using executive authority and 2 Supreme Court decisions that just came down in the last couple of weeks that you might have heard about along popular media. Unfortunately, the branch of government I won't be discussing is the legislative branch because Congress and the executive, as we all know, can't seem to get together on any kind of legislative fixes for the troubles in our immigration system. I should note right now, obviously, that the immigration system, particularly between Canada and the United States and Mexico and the United States, is pretty much on pause at the physical borders. And that's due to the fact that on March 20th, the Centers for Disease Control issued a sweeping order that authorized the summary expulsion of non-citizens arriving at the border without valid documents. And this is, so interesting enough, the big freeze right now on the borders with regard to people trying to get into the country seeking protection is ironically not an immigration law. It's rather a law that comes from the Public Health Services Act of 1944. And it basically deploys a medical quarantine authorization, override immigration law. So right now, everything is pretty much on pause. And I said that it's phrased as a medical quarantine, but the way that the order has been drafted, it's clearly designed to stop people who are coming to the country seeking protection. Because what it says is it applies to land travel for all covered aliens. And a covered alien is somebody who comes to the border without valid travel documents and is seeking entry, and it suspends their introduction into the country for 30 days. So it's really designed to single out people who are looking for asylum and people, both families and children as well, and basically ordering them removed from the country, completely overriding the existing legal system that we have. So that's the immediate situation, but I wanted to focus my quick review of what's been going on 3 topics: asylum, DACA, and an important decision from the Supreme Court concerning deportation. All right, so 3 topics: asylum, DACA, and deportation. Now, the pause right now is pausing a system that the Trump administration has been very intent on chipping away at. Since the Trump administration has come into office, they've continually tried to, through executive power, executive order, limit the effect of the asylum system. And I just want to focus on, let's see, 5 current features that the Trump administration has added to the asylum process, intended to simply stop people from accessing it. The first is called the Migrant Protection Protocols. You probably have heard of this, those who are following this. A complete misnomer, right? There's nothing protective about it, right? It applies to all migrants from Spanish-speaking countries besides Mexico who are coming to the United States and requesting protection under the immigration laws. The Trump administration does have the authority to require them to wait in a contiguous country, which in this case is Mexico. And we've had tens of thousands of people subjected to this program. It's been scaled back at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, but was very clearly directed at migrants and people seeking protection coming from Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. Together with that, the Trump administration broadened the use of what's called metering, which is a process whereby Customs and Border Protection simply limits the number of claims that can be made in a given day. The most recent data I have on this is from last August of 2019. There were 26,000 people on a waiting list waiting in Mexico. And again, the border, as you know, as you may have heard, many of the border cities in Mexico are very, very unsafe. So you've got tens of thousands of people subjected to the migrant protection protocols and subjected to this metering process that therefore they're simply come to the border, they're given a number and they're told to go wait in a refugee camp in very unsafe parts of Mexico for their number to be called. There certainly have been legal challenges to this. And I believe the most recent information I have is that there is a provisional certification of a class of all non-Mexican asylum seekers who are unable to make direct asylum claims because of this metering program. So this is currently under litigation. In addition to that, the Trump administration has introduced 2 more programs that I only became very recently familiar with. The Prompt Asylum Case Review and the Humanitarian Asylum Review Program. Again, both of them, the names suggest that they're interested in reviewing asylum claims and doing it promptly. But the upshot of both of these programs, the Prompt Asylum Case Review and the Humanitarian Asylum Review Program, it's really to expedite and streamline the ability to hear these cases while people are being detained. That's the idea. The Trump administration, as you probably heard, came into office saying that the asylum system was a big loophole. People were allowed to make the most implausible claims and they were just released into the country. And so his whole agenda has been to be to stop them from making claims. And if they even can make a claim, to make sure that they never get released from detention. So these programs are here to make sure they don't get released from detention by requiring a review of the claims within 10 days and making sure that someone is held in custody during that time. And actually, it's because they were being held in custody that the Trump administration used this CDC order under the public health law to say, we can't have all these people being held in detention together because that will spread coronavirus. So we have to empty out the detention facilities. How do we do that? We just expel people back into Mexico, right? So these efforts work in conjunction with each other. They work hand in hand. 2 more features that the Trump administration has added here. They've created agreements between the United States and Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador called asylum cooperative agreements, in which those countries agreed that if the United States asked them, they would accept somebody asking for asylum who arrived at the border, as long as they're not from the country that's going to receive them. So if you're from Guatemala, you can be subjected to this asylum cooperative agreement, and you can be sent to Honduras. And of course, the bitter irony of this is these are the three countries that are producing these large flows of people seeking protection in the United States. And the Trump administration has entered into agreements to receive people back and go through screenings and receive protection in those countries. The biggest problem, of course, is that those countries don't have very well functioning asylum processes. They're very poor countries. Social conditions that are producing the asylum flows are also a reason why they don't have particularly advanced systems for assessing whether someone should fear persecution in a neighboring country. The most recent statistics I have are that up to 700 migrants from El Salvador and Honduras will return to Guatemala under this program. The last and probably the largest procedure that Trump administration tried to apply here was basically a complete ban on asylum if you transited through another country to get to the United States. It was the transit country asylum ban. And it applied to, it said, anybody who arrived at the US-Mexico border and transited through another country, namely Mexico. Fortunately, most recently in July, beginning of this month, about a week ago actually, a federal court upheld a preliminary injunction against the use of that asylum ban. Now, we're not sure what the outcome of that's going to be because, the Trump administration can certainly appeal that decision to the Supreme Court. Again, everything is right now is on pause, but when that pause comes to an end, then this transit country asylum ban will be the next big legal issue, I think, to be resolved because of its breadth, right? Since most people arriving at the border, of course, travel through another country to get there. Proposed I'm sorry, folks. My computer is actually on low power right now, so I have to actually plug it in before I disappear off of the screen here. I'm sorry, I forgot that this was going on. So please excuse me while I get myself plugged into a power source here.
Karen Donahue, why don't you just put your question out there, and then he can cover it when he gets back to his desk. You'd have to unmute yourself, Karen. Unmute.
Any question?
Okay, yeah. The question, let's say, would a migrant from Asia or Africa be sent back to a place like Honduras or Guatemala? Or are they just Latin Americans? Or
no, as I understand it, it could be anybody. And it's one in which, again, these simply an agreement between the countries that if someone arrives in the United States and requests protection, as long as they're not from one of those countries, they can be sent back. At least that's my understanding of the cooperative agreements.
Thank you. So,
Andy, you want to take another 5 minutes, and then we'll. Does that give you enough time?
Sure. On June 15th, the Trump administration rolled out a whole set of proposed regulations that have far more impact long-term than those programs I just mentioned. And here's why. The proposed regulations would actually change the Code of Federal Regulations themselves regarding fundamental definitions that are part of somebody requesting asylum in the United States. Somebody requesting asylum in the United States has to prove that they are a refugee, and there is a definition of that in the immigration law. The proposed regulations would alter many aspects of that definition. And the only way and for many of the changes the Trump administration made, you can simply rescind them. the incoming administration can simply rescind them. For these proposed regulations, you would have to go back and change all the regulations through the administrative process, which is what the Trump administration is going through right now, right? They have a 30-day notice and comment period for these regulations that will come to an end on July 15th, so 2 days from today. Basically, the changes are that it would allow asylum claims to be dismissed without a hearing. It de facto eliminates all possibility of claims based on gender or gang violence, which are many of the types of claims that are coming up to the southern border are based on those sorts of scenarios, that the government is unable to protect someone because they're a member of a group of women who are subject to violence in personal relationships and domestic relationships. The Trump administration doesn't like these sorts of claims. It thinks that shouldn't be valid, and so by regulation, they're trying to de facto eliminate the possibility of those claims going forward. They're increasing the level of suffering you need to prove in order to prove that you've been persecuted. They're carving out exceptions to standard categories. For example, if you're tortured, obviously you would be qualified for protection. They're carving out an exception that says if a rogue officer tortures you, the person isn't ordered directly by the government to torture you, then you don't deserve protection in the United States. They're redefining what constitutes a political opinion, one of the most popular grounds for asserting that you're being persecuted, making it much more harder to make a claim, right? So that is coming down the pike. And as I said, well, you know, it's a change to the regulations that will then have to be undone through another regulatory change. The last two topics, DACA. Now, I'm sure most folks on the call have already heard that the Supreme Court overturned the Trump administration's efforts at rescinding DACA. It was a 5-4 decision. The Chief Justice, John Roberts, authored the opinion. The outcome was based upon the Administrative Procedures Act. The Administrative Procedures Act requires that agencies not engage in actions that are arbitrary and capricious. And the majority here decided that the Trump administration's rescission was arbitrary and capricious because it really didn't consider all of the impacts, all of the aspects of the problem before the agency. And secondly, it did not consider any reliance interests on people who received DACA as to what the impact of rescinding it would be, right? Now, the important thing is that this is not a decision that says the Trump administration can't rescind DACA. It's a decision that says the Trump administration has not given sound enough reason for rescinding DACA. And that's why the problem facing DACA recipients is still out there. They can still have it rescinded if the Trump administration then decides to go forward and come up with another explanation or a deeper explanation for why they're no longer going to provide this protection. Last topic, deportation. With the DACA decision, a lot of people were looking forward to another Supreme Court decision that was coming down, in which the person was asserting that and those who know the Constitution, right? The Constitution forbids the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus, known as the suspension clause. This individual came to the United States without documents. They were subjected to an expedited hearing, expedited removal. There is a very, very limited opportunity for a review by the federal courts of that decision. They said that this violated the suspension clause and that they should have the opportunity to file a writ for habeas corpus. This came out exactly the opposite of DACA. That is, that the Supreme Court decided that the suspension clause does not protect people who are in expedited proceedings. That the courts, the Congress's decision to greatly limit their ability to get habeas review is constitutional. And another troubling thing about the decision is that it was a 7-2 decision. It wasn't a 5-4 decision. So even justices that we thought might be favorably inclined to say the suspension clause would stop this process weren't willing to do so. The only thing that is, I suppose, of some way in which the decision is limited is the individual here was caught within 24 hours of entering the United States and within 25 miles of the border. And so the idea is that maybe if somebody was in the country longer and had gotten farther into the country, maybe then the court will be willing to say, no, the process that Congress has given violates the Constitution, it violates the suspension clause. And there has to be a more full court hearing before the person can simply be removed from the country. So those are the three topics I want to tackle: asylum, DACA, and deportation. I guess I would leave it to Jim and Bill as to whether you want to go to the next speaker or I can take questions.
There's no questions coming through on the chat right now. Why don't, if we could have everybody take a deep breath. Andy just took us through a mountain of great stuff. Andy, thanks very much. We have some great people in our parishes. So take a deep breath, and Yanira, we're going to bring Yanira on here. I think everybody may know that, you may have seen her a couple of weeks ago, but Yanira is on the staff. She's the national campaign director for one of our, or at least one of our trusted partners, called Alianza Americas. She's broadcasting from Puerto Rico. And having taken your deep breath now, Yanira, why don't you step right in?
Thank you, Bill, and thank you everyone for the time they may put my clock to run right now.
You know, Yanira, we'll, you know, when you're finished there, everybody will still have probably 15 minutes for a Q&A. And if you have questions ahead of time, put them in the chat box. Thank you, Yanira.
Thank you again for the opportunity and again highlighting the great initiative of organizing this type of conversation. So I commend you, Bill, and everyone leading the opportunities of bringing education to the community. And this evening, I'm going to share quickly, just like Andrew did. I'm going to walk through many things happening regarding temporary protected status and DACA. And just to briefly recap on what we discussed for those who attended the presentation last month on TPS. TPS is a temporary blanket relief program that provides relief from deportation and work authorization permit for people who cannot return safely to his or her country due to civil war, natural disasters, or any one or both issues preventing the person from safely returning to her or his country. So since 2016, and this program has been in place since the 90s. But in 2016, we started seeing a development of the issues, starting with President Obama canceling TPS relief for 3 African countries, Sierra Leone, let me do here, Guinea, and Liberia. By February 2017, information leaked in the media letting us know that Trump was planning to cancel the TPS relief for Haiti. And they were trying to find as much information within their plan, trying to create a bad and negative image towards Haitians who are protected with TPS. We heard they were trying to get people that perhaps have any criminal record or that are a public charge. At that moment, public charge was not in the public view yet as an attack, as a upfront attack against immigrants. But this was one of the first instances in which we learned that the administration was trying to use if a particular population is using public benefits to stigmatize and make that issue negative in order to cancel or create an image that prompts to removing from the relief from TPS. In 2017, USCIS announces only 6 months extension for Haiti instead of 18 months. This triggered chaos among Haitian TPS holders. At least 1,800 TPS holders from Haiti decided to immediately leave the United States from the different states where they were residing, Florida, Texas, Massachusetts, and they started traveling to Canada. They were hoping to seek asylum by the time they left the United States. Unfortunately, 90% of those 1,800 Haitian DPS holders were deported back to Haiti, and only 10% were able to successfully apply for asylum in Canada. Canada immediately deployed staff from the government. They sent it to the United States, particularly to Florida, New York, where there is a large Haitian population, advising them not to go because their immigration policies on the asylum is just as terrible, just like Andrew mentioned. And it was very unfortunate to see that what the announcement of 6 months, it was not a cancellation, triggered the panic of that many Haitian TPS holders. By September 2017, Trump issued an order to cancel the relief for DACA recipients, with the argument that the program is unconstitutional and that Obama had a rule or took a decision going over his presidential powers. By October 2017, the USCIS announces the last TPS extension for Sudan. Sudan, although has a small population, it was the first country in receiving an announcement by the administration saying that all the conditions that prompted the designation for a temporary protected status for Sudanese were no longer in place. So meaning that the country is in good shape, meaning that the reasons that forced people to leave Sudan or prevented people from safely returning, those reasons were no longer there, and therefore the program is no longer needed. And that was the argument used as well, by the way, by Obama in 2016 when he canceled the relief for Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia. By January 2018, USCIS announced the last TPS relief. By November 2017, USCIS announces the last TPS extension for Haiti and Nicaragua. Remember that in May, the administration announced only 6 months. By November that year, and by the way, it was during the eve of Thanksgiving, the administration announced the last extension. It was 18 months for Haiti, same period for Nicaragua, 18 months, but granted 6 months for Honduras, and saying that they will be reviewing the case of Honduras at that time in November 2017. And after 6 months, that the government will issue a new decision if to continue to extend the status or do the same as they already did with Sudan, Haiti, and Nicaragua. By January 2018, USCIS announces the last TPS extension for El Salvador. And this is the country with the largest population. And by the way, I am a TPS holder as well from El Salvador.
Yanira, how many, when you talk about El Salvador, how many thousands of people did that panic? How many in the United States, how many that probably caused panic, and how many people?
I'm gonna go back on Haiti. Haiti, it's more than 50,000. Honduras is close to 70. Nicaragua, 200 and 500. Sudan, if I am not wrong, it's close to 1,500. And let's see, Nepal, which is the next country that was canceled right after El Salvador, it's close to 30 to 40,000. But in total, by January 2018, we were speaking of close to 300,000, more than 300,000 people losing their status. By the time Nepal was canceled, now we're speaking of close to 400,000 people that we are pending to know what's going to happen with what happened on March 18, March 12, when the case of known as Krista Ramos versus Nielsen, which was the Secretary of Homeland Security at that moment, decided on behalf of the administration to cancel the relief for each of the countries that I have mentioned. There was a previous Homeland Security Secretary that escapes her name at this moment, but next, I'm gonna give you a little bit of the timeline of the Ramos versus Nielsen, which is there are more than a dozen lawsuits across the United States in support of just TPS, compared to DACA, which I think it could be close to the same amount of lawsuits as well. There are lawsuits in support of TPS and DACA in the states of New York, California, Maryland for the case of TPS, DC for the case of DACA, and for DACA also in a court in Hawaii. And there is one or a couple of lawsuits in support of the administration canceling the relief for DACA, and I believe one of them is in the state of Texas, which is the one that is still pending. By March 12, 2018, the Ramos versus Nielsen lawsuit was filed by 9 adults and 5 children of U.S. citizen children of TPS parents. And the arguments of the families, it was the imminent harm of separating the U.S. citizen children from their TPS holder parents. Also that the administration canceled each of the 4 countries at that time, El Salvador, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Sudan, that each of the countries were not really canceled because the conditions were improved, but because it was animals or racist or xenophobic arguments behind the decision. By August 6, 2018, the judge in the 9th Circuit in Northern California issued his preliminary order ordering the government to temporarily halt the cancellation of TPS for these countries. And there was an agreement as a result of the preliminary injunction. And the order mandated the government to take any necessary actions to make sure that while the case is in the court and is not resolved, the government should continue to issue work authorization and to continue to the validity of the status of stopping deportations for all TPS holders who have received a cancellation. By June of that year, Nepal and Honduras already received a cancellation of their TPS status as well. And then during that month, the same litigators, the ACLU of Southern California, submitted a new lawsuit in support of Nepal and Honduras. In October, the judge decides, since the arguments are very similar, joined both lawsuits, and from that moment on, any decision on the Ramos affects as well Honduras and Nepal, meaning we are now, we continue to have a temporary halt on deportations and preventing the administration from canceling the program. In August 2019, finally the administration has a time for a hearing, but they decided to move the case to Pasadena, which is the southern part of California, where the administration has there is a panel of 3 judges. 2 of them were appointed by Republican presidents, one by Bush, one for Trump, and the other by Obama. So the uncertainty is that the 2 Republican appointed judges may lean in favor of the administration. By October on 2019, there was no final decision on the case, on the Ramos case, and the court issued a third preliminary decision, extended the preliminary decision, continue to prevent the cancellation of the relief of TPS for the 6 countries. That means one of the agreements, it was to provide auto extensions instead of extensions. The difference between an extension and auto extension is that for extending, we have to submit an application, we have to pay a fee, and we receive a documentation that states that we have an immigration status and a work authorization document. The auto extension only requires the beneficiary of the program to download a document from the website of the USCIS website, and that's the only proof we have for any federal agency, ICE officials, or the police to prove that we have an immigration status. By May this year, the ACLU, as soon as we heard from the Supreme Court decision on DACA, they attempted to present more evidence based on the arguments and the decision of the Supreme Court, but the panel of judges denied the opportunity to include that documentation. That led to the belief that perhaps the court is ready, the Pasadena court is ready for a final decision. And we are, as we speak, waiting to know if there's going to be something coming up this month or perhaps in the month of August. What do this mean? This is, of course, a political game. We are in election year. This is something to engulf and to keep the Trump and Republican base fire up and to vote for them. But also it's a violation of rights for both DACA and TPS holders. What are the implications for all of us in this situation? Potential loss of immigration protections anytime that the court decides, or perhaps the Trump administration comes up with any other executive order to attack DACA. We also heard that perhaps the Department of Justice might come with a memorandum also to state that DACA is illegal. Another consequence, uncertainty at the workplace, no longer able to work, unable to study for the kids that are enrolled at school or at universities. The risk of detention and deportation, depending on which states and cities we reside. There are cities that are friendlier and there are cities that are not friendlier with immigrants, and there are ordinances in local laws that increases the chances for detention and deportations. And also, another risk is a family separation. I'm gonna take 2 more minutes to end the part I have. What we all can do, go on record. The power of faith-based communities can help us impact the public discourse. It shows solidarity to prepare the community to stand up with both communities. Organize more circles of support, just like Bill said at the beginning of the call. Members of Congress are people of faith too. So let's mobilize their peers. Anyone who identifies with the same faith of your senators or House representatives should be part of these conversations as well. Use social media. Elected officials are paying attention a lot to social media, to what we say, to what we are asking them. And that also means using any resources available. Everyone has a phone. You can record yourself and send a short message. And I have a sample in this presentation. Schedule district visits. No one is going to allow you to in-person meetings. It's going to be a phone or video meeting, just like this. And ask them to member of Congress to support. There are 3 legislations. HR 6, we know that's what we want because that's what provides permanent protections, but it's not gonna happen in the side of the Senate. Already passed the House, but the House, even though they did the job, they cannot just stand and wait and see what the Senate do. They can also have the power to create this as an urgent issue. If they don't create the urgency, the leadership in Congress won't do anything, including the White House won't consider this an urgent matter. The Secure Act, which is another bill, but that only protects TPS holders, can be, if needed, amended to include DACA recipients. And the HEROES Act, it doesn't provide longer protection is just an extension of what we have, but the extension goes to 2 years and 18 months, hopefully giving us more time to for a new Congress or perhaps a new administration. And local work, its power. Local elected officials can prevent from agreements on detentions, on deportations, but also allocating money for basic needs, for securing access to healthcare for everyone in your state, access to food, access to housing, education, in the event that TPS holders and DACA recipients see themselves losing their status. There are 4 key phases from now through August. Push to get the HEROES Act passed that not only includes the relief for small business and people who are unemployed, but also the language to protect temporarily TPS and DACA holders. Phase 2, increase the awareness to everyone, not just elected officials, about the potential risk of a revoke of the TPS program, but also the potential memo of the Department of Justice or an executive order against DACA. The Ramos, post-Ramos, if we have a bad decision against Ramos, there is an opportunity also to continue the fight in the continuing resolution, which is the discussions of the federal budget for 2020, for what is left, but also the continuing resolution for the next fiscal year, 2021, which start in October, November this year. Last but not least, if we hopefully have an election this year, the lame duck is another opportunity for educating the new members of Congress, and perhaps hopefully if we have a new administration, targeting the new transition team. And I have for you this presentation. I will be sending it to Bill. I have sample messages if you're a faith-based leader, if you're a faith leader or a member of a faith congregation, a sample message, what you can tell when you pick up the phone, or also you can videotape yourself reading this and asking this message to your member of Congress, but also business owners. They cannot lose the essential workers and any workers in the state of Michigan. And this is another sample message that we can use to engage business owners. And we're hoping to have Bill and some of you also helping us recording one of these videos. I'm gonna stop there.
Okay, everybody got that? You got the whole thing? Okay, Yanira, thanks very much. Those last couple of slides, especially that last slide, was very helpful. It's for us, the simpler it is, the more we can get our parishioners to weigh in on it. For instance, that last message. I should say that one of the early things that Strangers No Longer did is we collected, Sister Becky from Christ the Good Shepherd should know about this. I think it was 2 summers ago, we collected something like 11,000 letters to our US senators around immigration things. We collected because people like our circles, Sister Becky and some of her parishioners went to the entire Christ the Good Shepherd congregation and actually asked them to sign a letter individually. It was the same letter, but there were 500 people that signed the letter. So we do have a question. Thank you. So Andy and Yanira, we've got 12 minutes here. Gary Hannafy from Jesu. Gary, if you want to unmute yourself. Gary Hannafy.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were going to ask it. That's why I sent it to you. All right, I can go ahead. So I didn't understand. I'm sorry, Miss. What was the premise of the Ramos versus Nielsen case? What was the basic premise of that case? And is that still going on, or is that decided? Sorry.
It's still going on. It's still going on. Thank you for the question. And that one, the lawsuit was submitted in March 12, 2018. A few months right after the cancellation of El Salvador. At that time, there were already 4 countries canceled: Haiti, Sudan, Nicaragua, and El Salvador. And the arguments, the key arguments for the Ramos case is that the administration acted in bad faith, that they did not follow their recommendations as per the Department of State, and also the protocols to verify that the conditions no longer persist in all of these countries, the conditions that prevent people from safely returning. And one of the conditions includes pandemics, as we know, or epidemics. Now that we have COVID, it's even more stronger the proof that no one from all the 6 countries that have received a cancellation cannot safely return to the countries of origin, even if that was not the original reason why the TPS was designated to all of them. It does not represent a safe way for TPS holders to return. And the administration, the argument says that it is a temporary program, and also that the conditions were already resolved. For example, in the case of El Salvador, in my country, the designation was based on 2 strong earthquakes. And the administration says that a lot of the infrastructure already was recovered. But it's not about just the infrastructure, but all the issues that are associated when a country's infrastructure is damaged: unemployment, lack of access to healthcare, the cost of life is more expensive. So all of those details are not being taken in consideration by the administration. Needless to say that TPS holders, the majority send remittances to our countries of origin, and what keeps afloat to our countries is the remittances that we send, along with many others that are undocumented. And the case has not been resolved. We are awaiting a decision by the Pasadena court sometime from tomorrow. It can be any time from tomorrow to August that a decision can come from the panel of 3 judges.
All right, I'd like to ask Rich Faba. Now, Rich, you and Bridget Theodorov, there's several of you that are on the advocacy committee or the advocacy task force. From what Andy, Professor Moore, and Ms. Arias, Yanira, when you talk about your task force, do you have enough information? Do you have any questions so that when you begin to make some plans for our September and October actions, do you need any more information?
Actually, Bill, I don't think we do, although I would offer to anyone in the audience that, you know, we have an advocacy task force. We're always looking for new membership, new folks to help us. And as Bill said, in the coming weeks now, we're going to start focusing on advocacy in terms of the coming elections, the things that both Yanira and the other gentleman talked about. So we could certainly use the help. I think we're pretty set though, Bill, in terms of the data they have, and I'll certainly talk to Yanira offline on that as well. So I think we're fine with that.
Okay. Any other questions, please?
Bill, I had a question for Andy Moore. Andy, what can the Trump administration do about DACA in the next 16 weeks responding to the Supreme Court? What does it look like they'll do?
So what they can do is they can then start the process over again and say, here are our reasons for rescinding DACA. And I'm assuming everybody on the call is familiar with DACA, right?
Yes.
Does anybody needs a background on
that? Go ahead, Andy.
All right, so go ahead with a background. Go ahead just explaining what the Trump administration is going to do.
Yeah, what the Trump administration?
Yeah, so the Trump administration will start the process again, but will not have the time to be able to complete it, because obviously once they roll out another explanation, there's going to be another lawsuit brought against the Trump administration, again challenging it on the Administrative Procedures Act. And again, that law says that an agency action cannot be arbitrary and capricious. And even if the Trump administration comes up with a better explanation this time, and basically what the Supreme Court said was, well, you're saying that you're no longer going to forbear from removing these people, but you haven't told us why. There's no reason why. You haven't given us any reason why you're not going to do that. Well, if the Trump administration comes up with some explanation that says, well, we're usurping Congress's role, or we think that's a bad idea, that probably will ultimately pass muster, but it will still have to go through litigation, and probably will not occur before the next election. That's the prediction from most.
Okay, I have a follow-up question on that too, for Yanira or Andy, either one. Let's say, hopefully, there's a change of administration. How quick can the Biden administration change these executive orders, or what's happened? What do you see as your opinion on that?
So for some of these policies, what the Trump administration, well, for the current pause on border transit is set to expire. I forget what how far they've extended it, but it's in increments of a certain number of days. So that is something that could expire on its own accord. For a lot of what the Trump administration has done, for example, DACA, it's simply a decision that the administration is making, and the subsequent administration can just say we're not doing that and just reverse the policy decision. A lot of the Trump administration's banning of immigrants has been done by proclamation, in which they're relying upon a power granted to the president in the immigration law that says he can suspend for any length of time he thinks necessary any classes of immigrants for as long as he thinks it's necessary. Again, those can just come to an end with the new administration. But with the proposed changes to the rules, the Code of Federal Regulations, those will have to go through an administrative change, right? You'll have to propose new rules, go through the notice and comment period to implement those. So the real long-term challenges is to the proposed changes to the asylum regulations themselves.
And that can be a risk as well if they decide to use the Department of Justice to create a memo to define DACA as an illegal action, as an illegal decision that the president took. And in the case of a new administration, let's remember legislation to protect this subpopulation and any population without an immigration status starts in Congress, that they have to legislate. And if we still have the gridlock of one house, at one side of the aisle is Democrat and the other is Republican, the new president will face the challenges that Obama faced in the last administration, but that unfortunately did not took the opportunity when he had both chambers. So if we have hopefully a new administration and a change of composition of power forces in Senate, mostly in the Senate, and if the Democrats don't lose seats in the House, and they are able to work their peers in a more red or purple states to vote for legislation to protect these populations, but also all the 11 million, because that's the pending task that many of us were working on the 11 million prior the attacks to DACA and TPS. So the chances depends on composition of power on the chambers, on both chambers, but also this is why the effort of impacting public opinion matters. Particularly elected officials are paying attention to constituency is telling them to do.
We're coming to the end of the hour here. Yanira shared, if you can open up your chat, if you know how to do this, Yanira did share some documents with us. I'll be asking her to send those to us so that we can distill them and get them out. Again, I'd love to have you join the advocacy task force. Let us know, because September and October, at least once we get beyond the August 25th Catholic social teaching, we'll be able to hopefully be able to really jump into some action. So it's the top of the hour. Professor, let's, if we were in person, we could do this easily, but at least let's put our hands together for Professor Andy Moore and Yanira Arias from Alianza. So please, thank you very much. Let's put your hands together if you can see each other there. Thank you, Andy Moore. Thank you, Yanira. And Jim Sweeney and Jesu, thanks for setting this up. Any parish circle can do that. We'd love to have you set up a deeper dive for your people, and we'll invite others from Strangers No Longer. Have a good night. And I'm looking at Jim Sweeney. Are we all set, Jim? All set?
I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. That was terrific. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you, Jason.
Night.
Night.
Good night.